I'm Mark Soicher, Human Resource Counsel at CBIA, and I'm here with Joe Wellington, an attorney with Carmody and Torrance in Waterbury, and Joe works on environmental health and safety issues at Carmody and Torrance. Carmody and Torrance is co-sponsoring CBIA's Health, Safety, and Wellness Conference on March 26th in Southington, and Joe is going to be speaking at that conference on the subject of ergonomics and also reviewing expected activity, regulatory directives, and such in the coming months under the new Obama administration. Joe, I'd like to ask you, what do you see as the single most significant action likely to come from the Department of Labor in the area of environmental health and safety initiatives and regulatory oversight?
Well, Mark, as you mentioned, we'll be talking on ergonomics, and the reason I'm doing that is I feel that's the most likely change that we'll be seeing.
And wasn't that rule already promulgated at some time in the past? And also, what is ergonomics? For those
Well,
that may not
that's
be
two
familiar.
questions. I'll answer them separately. The first one is, has it existed before? And the answer is yes. In the waning days of the Clinton administration, it was passed as a final rule. It became effective 4 days before President Bush was sworn into office. 2 months later, Congress repealed the regulation under an act that allows Congress to review regulations and repeal them. Now, ergonomics is a study of how humans interface with their workplace. It identifies what hazards are there and how to deal with those hazards, to abate them or to reduce employee exposure to the hazards.
Can you identify what the particular risk factors are involved in ergonomics?
There's several risk factors. One of the risk factors, obviously, is repetition. Everybody's heard about carpal tunnel syndrome. There's force, awkward posture, vibration, and then also contact stress.
Can you give some examples of the kinds of activities that might be connected to those types of stresses?
Yes, when you look at force, you're looking at lifting, pushing, pulling, heavy weights, or slippery rates, or obstacles that are difficult to get a hold of. When you look at awkward posture, an example of that would be working with your elbows above your head for 2 hours a day. Who might do that? Heating, ventilation, air conditioning people, people who work in other areas where they have to get into an awkward position. Repetition, as I mentioned a few moments ago, would be in the context of entering data. The standard says 4 hours a day of entering data. Vibration would be an example of that would be using a small hand tool that vibrates, such as a sander, or a large hand tool, such as a jackhammer, for more than a couple hours a day. Contact stress would occur when you use your hand as a hammer, or when you're required to come into contact with sharp edges of objects, such as the edge of a desk, or some other area where you're required to put pressure on a portion of your body.
Now, if this rule was reissued, would these standards apply to all employers, or are there different industries, sizes?
They would apply to all employers. The one area where employers get some relief is if you have 10 or less employees, the record keeping is less onerous. But other than that, the standards would apply to all employers, regardless of the size of their workforce.
What kind of challenges or tasks would an employer face in having to put together a compliance program in this area?
I think the greatest challenge that the employer would face is the lack of in-house expertise. When you look at these rules and when they were promulgated, there was a tremendous amount of study, there was a tremendous amount of hearings and so forth. The final rule had 508 pages of information for about a 6-page rule. And so there's a lot of information out there that the average typical employer will not have. So as a result of that, the employer is going to have to hire consultants. So not only do you have the lack of in-house expertise to identify the hazard, you're also going to have a problem with the cost of paying someone else to identify the hazard and figuring out how to solve it. Then there's the issue of hazard control. Let's say you have a workforce of 20 people. Those 20 people all do the same activity, but they're exposed to an ergonomics hazard. One of the remedies is an administrative control where you rotate them out of the job periodically so they're no longer exposed above the limits. Well, if you have a workforce of 20 people, where do you send them and what do they do when they get there? And who do you replace them with? So there's a problem also of actually implementing the fix, for want of a better phrase, to abate the hazard or to cut down employee exposure.
Almost like musical workstations.
Yeah, musical workstations is micro breaks. There's ways that the standard would suggest you deal with it.
How likely is it that we're going to see this rule reissued and enforced?
I sense it's more likely than not. In fact, it's probable. And the reason I say that is historically, OSHA has enforced ergonomics under the General Duty Clause. It's far more difficult to prove a case under the General Duty Clause of the OSHA Act, the 1970 OSHA Act, because you have to prove the existence of a hazard. If you have the rule, the hazard is presumed. And so it makes it a lot easier for OSHA to bring a case if the rule is in place. And again, there was a lot of effort put to get it promulgated in the late Clinton administration.
Do you, opinions on this? What are you hearing? Do you think this is a reasonable approach to regulating this area?
Well, reasonableness, I guess, like anything else, including beauty, is in the eyes of the beholder, and including global warming. There's issues out there. It's clear to me that the rule and its proposed remedies were not written by someone who ever had to run a business. I refer back to the example of you have 20 employees and you have to rotate them, but you only have 20 employees. Compliance with the rule will be difficult. It will be costly, and it will require employers to engage in a thought process they never had before. On the other hand, OSHA has been successful in bringing prosecutions, I say prosecutions, administrative enforcement actions, and they have succeeded under the General Duty Clause, and they've also lost under the General Duty Clause. So if you have an ergonomics problem, the answer is not to ignore it until the rule is reissued. Identify the problem and deal with it. An employee in pain is one who's not productive.
And it seems like this would address workers' comp concerns.
It also would address workers' comp.
With or without the OSHA.
With or without OSHA. If an employee is injured, you're going to be paying more for workers' comp because you're going to be sending more employees to the doctor.
Fascinating concepts, and really looking forward to hearing this in more detail at the conference in Southington on March 26th, and also your insights into what you foresee in addition to that coming forward out of the federal administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I look forward to it.